You feel the cold before you see anything. It cuts through in seconds, not minutes. Your breath turns to fog, your fingers go numb, and the wind carries a bite that modern winter jackets were invented to erase. Now imagine that cold lasting for months. Not a bad week, not one brutal storm, an entire season, followed by another, for thousands of years in a row. For roughly 20,000 years, this was simply what winter meant. This wasn't an unusual event. This was the world your ancestors were born into, grew up in, and somehow, generation after generation, survived. So how did anyone live through that? No heated homes, no synthetic insulation, no supply chain bringing food when the ground froze solid? How do you survive a winter that modern humans would consider a global catastrophe? The answer isn't luck. It's a set of solutions so effective that some of them are still baked into human culture today, even if you've never noticed them. Start with the obvious problem: shelter. During the depths of the last ice age, much of Europe and Asia had almost no trees. The cold, dry climate had turned dense forest into open steppe and tundra. No wood for building, no wood for burning. So what did people build shelters out of? Bones. Specifically, mammoth bones. At a site called Mezerich in what is now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of ancient dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth skeletons. Skulls stacked to form walls, jaw bones used as foundations, long leg bones arranged like structural beams, likely covered with hides stretched tight to block the wind. One dwelling alone used bones from dozens of mammoths. Think about the scale of that undertaking. This wasn't a shelter thrown together in an afternoon. It was engineering, built from the largest animals on the landscape, designed to survive winds that could level anything flimsier. Your ancestors weren't just hiding from the Ice Age. They were building fortresses against it, out of the very animals the Ice Age forced them to hunt. But bones alone don't keep you warm. You needed a second layer of protection. You needed clothing that actually worked. This is where the archaeological record gets surprising. For a long time, scientists assumed Ice Age humans wrapped themselves in loose animal hides like a blanket thrown over the shoulders. But research by archaeologist Olga Sofer, who studied tiny artifacts found at Upper Paleolithic sites, uncovered something else entirely. Impressions of woven fibers pressed into fired clay, and tiny-eyed needles carved from bone, fine enough to sew tightly fitted garments. Not capes, not blankets, tailored clothing, fitted sleeves, layered furs, possibly even the earliest form of something close to boots, cinched to keep the cold from creeping in through every gap. Sewing wasn't a convenience in the Ice Age. It was survival technology, arguably one of the most important inventions your ancestors ever made, right up there with fire. And speaking of fire, it did more than provide light and cook food. It became a survival tool that let humans reshape stone itself. Some archaeologists studying Ice Age tool sites, including work associated with researcher John Hofecker on human adaptation across the Eurasian mammoth steppe, point to how deliberately controlled fire allowed people to heat treat certain stones before knapping them into tools, making the blades sharper and more reliable. In a world where every hunt mattered, a stronger blade wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between eating and starving. Now picture the full scene. Not the movie version, the real one. Outside, the wind is constant, dragging loose snow sideways across a landscape with almost no trees to slow it down. Inside a mammoth bone shelter, a small fire burns near the center, smoke curling upward through a gap left in the hide roof. People are seated close together, wrapped in tightly sewn fur garments, some working stone tools by firelight, others repairing a torn seam with a bone needle and sinew thread. Children are wedged between adults for warmth. Someone occasionally steps outside, just long enough to check a trap line or gather more fuel, then ducks back in fast. Every single person in that shelter depends on every other person in it. There is no surviving an Ice Age winter alone. That's the counterintuitive twist most people miss. You'd think the harshest environment would produce the most isolated, self-reliant humans. The opposite happened. Ice Age winters forced people into some of the tightest, most cooperative social groups in human history. One of the clearest windows into this comes from a burial site called Sungir in present-day Russia, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago. Archaeologists uncovered graves containing thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads sewn directly onto elaborate clothing, along with spears, pendants, and ornaments. Creating that many beads by hand, using only stone tools, would have taken an extraordinary number of hours. This wasn't wealth in the modern sense. It was proof of deep social investment, of a community pouring enormous collective effort into honoring its dead, even in the middle of the harshest climate humans had ever faced. Survival wasn't just physical, it was social. A group that shared food during a failed hunt, that took turns tending the fire through the night, that mended each other's clothing before a seam gave out in the cold, had a real advantage over any individual trying to go it alone. The Ice Age didn't just test the body, it tested the bonds between people, and it rewarded the groups who held those bonds tightest. So what happened to all of that? Why does modern winter feel so disconnected from any of this? Central heating happened, insulated buildings happened, grocery stores that stay stocked no matter what the sky is doing outside. Somewhere along the way, staying warm stopped requiring a community effort and became something you do alone, in a heated room, without needing anyone else at all. But the instincts didn't disappear, they just went quiet. You still feel it faintly every winter, the pull to gather close with people you trust, the specific comfort of shared warmth, whether that's a crowded kitchen, a blanket split between two people, or simply not wanting to be the only one awake in a cold, dark house. That's not sentimentality. That's tens of thousands of years of Ice Age survival, still running quietly in the background of a nervous system built long before central heating existed. Next time winter makes you want to be near someone, remember what that instinct actually is. It's not a modern comfort. It's an ancient survival strategy, one that got your ancestors through cold you and I can barely imagine. One shelter, one shared fire, one sewn seam at a time. You feel the cold before you see anything. But your ancestors learned, thousands of years before you were born, that the real defense against it was never just bone or fur or fire, it was each other.